It's two brothers teaching truth, fighting false doctrine and priestcraft in the last days. And it's two brothers. It's just two brothers.
Welcome everybody to
Two Brothers.
Dos hermanos.
That's the two brothers coming at you for another video. We're following up in our last couple videos, which we've had some amazing feedback on.
Yeah, thanks everyone for watching and for your comments and stuff. It's been awesome.
We really wanted to... We spent a lot of time in the last video sort of explaining to people, we believe that we're in the last days. We believe we're in the last days.
We said that a lot. Yeah.
Okay, and we didn't get into many specific details. We basically just tried to explain that certain things have woken us up as to the times that we're in, and we know what those things are, but you guys may not know what some of those things are. And so today what we're going to do is part of a series of videos where we're going to go into what some of those specific things are. Now, some of these topics are so big, I think we're still only touching a fraction of that
really
doctrine.
Hard, yeah. We're getting used to going through these really deep topics and actually breaking them down, and it takes much more time than we expect.
Yeah. I think for the majority of the topics that we're going to go over today and in the days to come, we could actually spend so much time on.
Yeah.
We're just going to give you an amount so that it makes some sense to you.
Yeah.
And if we love the feedback and we love the comments with the people that are watching. So if you have any questions or you've got any interest in any parts that we're sharing, we'd love to do more on them. Just let us know.
Yep. So what's been really cool is the comments that everyone have been giving us on our videos. We've had a few from people we actually know. We've had a lot from people we don't know at all. And so some of the people we do know, it's been really nice. They've messaged us, DM'd us and said basically, hey, we feel the same. You know, we're going through the same thing that you guys have sort of said in our wake up video and stuff.
Yeah. People feel isolated, especially with COVID-19.
Yeah.
There's people all around the world. It's a worldwide church that we're a part of, and there's people everywhere, and they're saying things like, you know, it's not just me. You know, my husband's not really on board, and you know, I'm thinking all these things, and I feel a little bit alone. And they've come to us and said things like, "You're making me feel like I'm not alone."
Yeah, they're going through the same thing, and they've kind of been asleep as well, or you know, going through the motions. Kind of what we were talking about, and now they feel good because they're the same. They feel the same. They feel like got someone else to relate to.
This is resonating with them.
Which we're really happy about, and so we're going to keep doing this in the hopes that we can help people wake up or understand they're not alone. We're all in this together. It's the last days, and
And also, just so you know, for the people that have contacted us and shared some of their experience, we could not be more grateful to have had those experiences shared with us. The whole reason that we're sitting here and even doing this is because we're hoping to touch the lives of one person. You know, and already the feedback has been so positive, and we just want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for sharing your experiences with us, which strengthen us as well. We're all in this journey together.
And we've got a fancy new background.
And if you haven't noticed, we're up in the sky. So we're going to go through the doctrine today, and hopefully you stick with us. Now, one thing we want you to be clear up front is we believe in the words of the prophets
and scriptures.
And the scriptures. So if prophets in times past, we're talking about Joseph Smith, Ezra, Taft, Benson, all since the Restoration, and of course, you know,
scriptural prophets,
Old Testament, New Testament, you know, Jesus. We believe in all of their words. So we're going to be sharing those, and we're going to be basing a lot of what we're talking about off of their words and the scriptures. If that's a concern for you, so if you're listening to what we're saying and we're reading the words of Joseph Smith, and you're like, that can't be real. That can't. I think what you probably need to. We can't help you there. What you probably need to do is maybe think that these videos might not necessarily be for you, because if you're not on the same page as in believing what the prophets are teaching us and believing what the scriptures are saying, then nothing that we're going to do is going to make any sense whatsoever.
It's not going to matter to you.
So if people are watching this thinking, oh, cool, I'm just going to take notes on what these guys reckon so I can do a timeline. If you're not sold on the fact that Joseph Smith is a prophet, you know, that Ezra, Taft, Benson was a prophet, or that any of these these prophets of the restored gospel are prophets of God and that their words are effectively scripture is not going to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Just keep that in mind. That's all we're saying.
So we're gonna go through this sort of systematically, and we align our beliefs as close to what the prophets have said and what Scripture says. So again, if that's not your cup of tea, we're not here for opinion. We're here for as close to doctrine as possible. So what we're going to be talking about today, I don't even know if we've mentioned what we're talking about today. We're going to follow up from our previous...
Two brothers!
Two brothers.
There's two brothers.
That's the main thing. There's two of them. So what we're going to follow up on is in regards to what we talked about in our wake up videos, our wake up stories, and how it was we mentioned it's the last of the last days, and we're going to talk more about that and how we know that, because I don't know that a lot of people, when they're waking up, but I don't know if they really truly understand or feel that it is really the last of the last days, because we said it's been the last days for a long time.
Well, I think for a lot of people, they're waking up to something.
Yeah.
They're waking up to the reality of some things happening, and pinpointing what those things are is difficult, especially in a church where I think the bulk of members are sleeping. So a lot of these people don't have people to bounce ideas off of where we are and what's going on. So,
and it takes a lot of study yourself again to get this information. You can either watch videos on YouTube, which is pretty much what we've done, but you've got to study yourself as well. Otherwise, I mean, we spend so much time doing the basic church principles, going over that non-stop, because that is obviously most important. You don't really get this stuff unless you're really looking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the wake up bit. So, okay, so now just quickly as well, as we started going through this topic, we realized, wow, this is going to be way bigger than we thought at the start. So this is going to be at least a two-part video. There may be more, but we realized this is going to be a lot more than we expected. So we're going to start with a talk that Ezra Taft Benson gave at BYU in 1981. It's called Prepare Yourselves for the Great Day of the Lord. It's not that long a talk, and I would really recommend, we may even link it in the description of the video, I really recommend people go and read it. I looked at it for a reference for something, and I was like, geez, this whole talk is amazing. So I'm just going to quote some of his talk here. The people of every generation, I suppose, see the time in which they live as being exceptional. The truth of the matter is that you do live in a most exceptional time in the history of the world. Now, this was 1981, 40 years ago. You young people will see events transpire which were promised from the beginning of the world. Prophets of old have seen your days and rejoiced in them. And yet you will face challenges and circumstances, the severity of which has been unparalleled in generations past. For this you must be prepared.
Like in there how it says, you young people. Who was he speaking to? It was a BYU speech. So speaking to the young people of the church at BYU at the time. Just interesting.
They'll be 60 now.
That's right. So you mentioned this is, 30, 40 years ago? 40. I can't count.
Yeah, it's 40 years ago.
So I need you.
Yeah.
All right, 40 years ago. So interesting that he was mentioning this specifically towards the young people. Right.
And
anyway,
so now they're not young.
Take note of that as we get through the rest of this.
He goes on to say, I speak to you on this subject, for I feel it is needed because of rumours, writings, and tape recordings, now we're talking old school, that have recently circulated among the saints.
Sorry, I couldn't quite
Series going off.
When you said tape recording, Siri's like,
tape. What is tape? Do not compute.
It's the wrong era.
That have recently circulated among the saints that have created among some of our church members a feeling of uncertainty. It calls to mind the counsel given by President Harold B. Lee. There are among us, many loose writings predicting the calamities which are about to overtake us. Some of these have been publicized as though they were necessary to wake up the world to the horrors about to overtake us. Many of these are from sources upon which there cannot be unquestioned reliance. Yeah. Are you aware of the fact that we need no such publications to be forewarned, if we were only conversant with what the Scriptures have already spoken to us in plainness? And that comes from Admonitions for the Priesthood of God, Ensign, January 1973. That was by President Harold B. Lee, and that's quoted by Ezra Taft Benson in his quote.
So what he's saying is, everything that we really need to know, we should be able to find the bulk of it out of the plainness that's written within the Scriptures. So where he says there that people have come up with rumors and writings and tape recordings, in our day that's YouTube videos and social media posts and forums and that type of thing. And are we not seeing that being so prevalent today, where people are coming up with ideas and fantasies and new age understanding of the gospel? He's saying if you can't, all that stuff you can't necessarily rely on, but what you can rely on is what the scriptures teach us in plainness. Yeah,
the reason I literally, because I didn't even intend when we started doing this to include this section, but I thought, Jesus is really pertinent, because this was 40 years ago. Rumors, writings, and tape recordings about, stuff that's calamities and things that are going to overtake us. That sounds so familiar to right now as well.
Yeah.
And obviously we've got YouTube now, which is, obviously hugely different to what they had back then. They had tape recordings and stuff. So it's more prevalent, I think. It's much easier to get that information, to put out information, and to get caught up and lost in that information. And it brings to mind 2 Timothy with the itching ears.
So this generation of people he's speaking to, he's saying to them, you're a special generation in the history of the world. Out of all the history of the whole world, this is a sort of a unique generation. Be careful what you're listening to about the gospel.
Don't get caught
You can't necessarily rely on... You cannot rely on what... Even though some of it might be true, you can't rely on anything except for what is taught in the plainness of the scriptures. And of course, included in that is the words of the prophets and the apostles.
Don't looking to get your itching ears scratched by...
Nothing wrong with listening, nothing wrong with seeking information, nothing wrong with any of that. But what can you actually rely on? Just understand all you should really be relying on for the absolute truth is scriptural.
Yeah, and it's plain.
Absolutely.
So he goes on, Ezra Taft Benson in that talk continues to go on, and he actually titles this next section, Prophecies Being Fulfilled. And he goes on, he says, a question asked by the disciples on the Mount of Olives, and the one pertinent to our time, was, what is the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world, or the destruction of the wicked, which is the end of the world? That's from the Joseph Smith translation of Matthew 24:4. And then he says, the Lord has designated these days in which we live as the times of the Gentiles, and he's put Luke 21:24 there. The Gentile nations are the so-called Christian nations, North and South America, and the European nations from which many of us came. The phrase times of the Gentiles refer to that period of time extending from when the gospel was restored to the world in 1830 to when the gospel will again be preached to the Jews after the Gentiles have rejected it.
Okay, so this is real. I mean, it's hard to overstate how important the prophecy of the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled actually is. If when the apostles of Jesus Christ went to him and said to him, how do we know when you're going to come again? And this is actually the answer. So this is like one of the number one answers that the Savior himself gave to signify the time when he's going to come again. It should be a significant point of reference for us as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We should be wanting to know, okay, if that is a major reference there, then how do we know when the times of the Gentiles are going to be fulfilled? And it talks about what the times of the Gentiles are. It says specifically there.
The period of time from the restoration of the gospel to when the gospel will be taken from the Gentiles because they rejected it and preached to the Jews.
Okay, so then what we need to reference is, what time does that period end? Do we have any other references? Do we have any other prophetic references? Do we have any other references from the scriptures to help us pinpoint what that time period is? And here's the good news, ladies and gentlemen.
We do.
Brought to you by your two favorite brothers. From your two favorite brothers. Actually, not from us, but your two brothers are here to break it down for you.
Yep. So Jesus himself designates the start of the last days to begin when the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled. In Doctrine and Covenants 45:24-25, it says this. Actually, I should mention that Doctrine and Covenants 45, which is what we're going to be talking a lot about now, funnily enough, was brought about according to Joseph Smith history because, I'll read it. that at the age of the church, many false reports and foolish stories were published and circulated to prevent people from investigating the work or embracing the faith. But to the joy of the saints, I received the following revelation, and it's Doctrine Covenants, section 45. But Jesus himself designates last days to begin when the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, right? So verse 24, and this I have told you concerning Jerusalem, the destruction of, and when the day shall come, shall a remnant of the Jews be scattered among all nations. And verse 25, but they shall be gathered again, but they shall remain, and I've got scattered, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And he's, in this revelation, he's explaining to Joseph Smith, or however this revelation was received, about what he said to the Jews. And, they didn't understand, right? And he was basically saying they're going to be scattered, they're going to be destroyed. But they will be gathered again. They shall be gathered again. But they shall remain scattered until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So, when the Jews are gathered again, is when the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled.
Right. And it's interesting that, well, what we know is that the Jews were physically scattered. They've been scattered a few times.
Many times, yeah.
In this circumstance, it was after the destruction of Jerusalem. They were taken away. And they were scattered amongst all nations. And what's important to mention here is that some people might think that it's talking about how even though the Jews were scattered physically, when it talks about the end of the time of the Gentiles, it's about the teaching of the Jews, the spiritual teaching of the Jews to be gathered in to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And also, although that does have a part later in the program,
that's not actually
what we're
saying.
talking about here. It's one fluid program. The Jews were scattered, and then the Jews would be once again gathered. So we're talking about the physical thing. Jerusalem was reunified under Israeli rule as a result of the 1967 Six-Day War launched against Israel by the Arab world. Before that, Jerusalem had been under British rule since they defeated the Ottoman Empire towards the end of World War I. Britain had promised to create and foster a Jewish national home as laid out in the Balfour Declaration, 1917. Since 1917, Jews have been moving back to Jerusalem, and this has increased drastically after 1967. And we've seen there's a lot of information out there from Jews all over the whole world where they're just being drawn back to their homeland. And there's been some incredible operations and papers and things where the Israeli nation has actually collected groups of Jews from certain places and assisted with their transplant back to their inheritance, back to their homeland.
I actually researched this subject as part of this a lot, and I looked at basically the history of Jerusalem and the amount of times it's been conquered and the Jews have been scattered and then they've tried to gather again. It's this non-stop pattern, which patterns are a big part of our religion. Things
Symbolism and patterns.
Yeah, like foreshadowing and things happening over and over again. But after 1967, when the Israelis actually finally got ownership or command of Jerusalem, there was a huge escalation in the amount of people moving back there. They want to be together, right? And so it's
so they've been doing it. They've been doing it since 1917. It really picked up after 1967, and since then, I heard mentioned somewhere, and this might not be correct, but I've heard mentioned that 97% of Jews all over the world are actually found within Israel. So if one of the key points here is that the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled means that the literal gathering of Jews back to their homeland, I think 97%.
Is 97% enough?
I think we're at a percentage now where you could say, okay, the bulk of them are effectively back, and the ones that aren't are probably not there by choice now. They're comfortable in wherever they are, but 97%. Could you imagine an ethnic group that was any other ethnic group
together
that was scattered over every nation in the world effectively, coming back to with near 100% gathering? I mean, it's
crazy.
It's prophetic.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? It's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
So according to verse 25, the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled somewhere between 1917 to 1967. I would confidently myself say that the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled completely, except that in the talk I mentioned before, Ezra, Taft, Benson said that the times of the Gentiles is that period of time extending from when the gospel was restored to the world in 1830 to when the gospel will again be preached to the Jews after the Gentiles have rejected it. So my question is, have the Gentiles rejected the gospel? And I say, look, not completely. People still join the church. There's still missionary work happening. It's still going forth. But we really should look at the numbers. But if I was to take a guess, I would say those numbers are down.
Okay. Well, I think this is one of those things that if you're watching this, I think everyone's going to have an opinion here. And I think the majority of the opinions are going to be in concert to each other. And that is that we're at a time where membership is struggling. I think new membership is going to be struggling. Missionary work, it's difficult for missionaries now. They can't even get out of their countries in most scenarios. People are starting to, their hearts are failing them. And there's beginning a falling away. One thing I wanted to make note on in the fulfillment of the time of the Gentiles, I don't think it's necessarily
like a cut-off date.
A cut and dry cut-off date where, okay, as of the 31st of December or whatever. Do we have a 31st in December?
I don't know.
Sing the song? No. Anyway, as of the last day of December in 2025, will be the fulfillment of the times of the Gentiles. I think it's as the gathering of the Jews took time and the majority are now there, I think there's like a trailing off period because the Jews do still need to have the opportunity to hear and understand the gospel of Jesus Christ. And
the Lord's not going to stop people coming in, yeah.
Well, it's part of this is that the gospel, part of the fulfillment of this is the gospel will eventually be sent to the Jews.
Yeah.
But there is a lot more that follow the initial fulfillment of the time of the Gentiles that has to occur before they start to receive the gospel of Jesus Christ. I look at it a little bit like, so I sell insurance, I look at it a little bit like a business that's closing down. As a business starts to wind down, they may have 90+% of their business has ceased, but they may still have a few contracts that they've put in place for a number of years, and they need to maintain some kind of skeleton staff or some kind of, minor operations. The business is effectively ended, but there are a few inconsistencies, a few things left. Trailing off insurance is probably still required. They might still need 1 or 2 staff members. Maybe they're just waiting for some accounts to wrap up so they can close all their books entirely before they can deregister the business. There's a period of time for businesses where
transitional.
It's not always a cut and dry date, but effectively, as of a certain period, the business is closing. And I think it's the same sort of thing.
We're not saying that the church is in a transitional period or they're going to end up closing their doors or stop or anything like that. But in terms of the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled,
specifically to this,
it seems like it's almost certainly fulfilled in terms of the Jews are all gathered again, or almost completely gathered again. It's whether or not the Gentiles have rejected the gospel, and it's definitely happening.
And I've had chats with people about this, and I've said, the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled, and they're like, oh, has it been fulfilled?
Yeah,
people are like, oh,
this is why we're talking about.
I think it's a much more nuanced conversation than just going, oh, I think the times of the Gentiles have been fulfilled, and they go, oh, well, where does it say that?
Yeah.
There's actually quite a bit to it, which we're going through now.
This is why you either go study for hours yourself, like we just did, or you can watch our video and hopefully get a bit of information.
Maybe a little bit of a shortcut. We'll see what we can do.
So what happens after the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled? We're going to keep now talking about Doctrine Covenants, section 45. There's a good chunk of verses in here that we're going to talk about. So verse 26, which is leading off from where we just talked about. And in that day, in brackets, we've sort of said, the day of the generation that will see the fulfillment of the times of the Gentiles shall be heard of wars and rumours of wars, and the whole earth shall be in commotion, and men's hearts shall fail them, as Ammon said. And they shall say that Christ delayeth his coming until the end of the earth. 27. And the love of men shall wax cold, and iniquity shall abound. 28. And when the times of the Gentiles is come in, a light shall break forth among them that sit in darkness, and it shall be the fullness of my gospel. So just quickly on that. When the times of the Gentiles has come in, a light shall break forth in the darkness, and it shall be the fullness of my gospel. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the church was restored in 1830, but I think, did anything happen between 1917 and 1967? I think with the advent of World War I and II, after that, and the Industrial Revolution, the gospel finally went to all the world. Before that, when it was restored, it was very much an American, because it had to be kind of. There was no, they went to, England and things, but it's now become a worldwide thing. So, just side subject there. But they receive it not, for they perceive not the light, and they turn their hearts from me because of the precepts of men. Which is what you were talking about with there being, eventually being a fall away. So we're reading from the scriptures here. That's what it's telling us that's going to happen. And if we're reading it sort of within a bit of a timeline, then we're shortly to see, if not already seeing, that period of time where the Gentiles and men are starting to turn their hearts away from him. For sure. Yeah, for sure. And in that generation, this is verse 30, and in that generation shall the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So that generation... What about the generation? What generation? I don't know.
Well, who's the generation?
Well, it has to be someone who's sort of between 1917 and 1967, if we're talking about the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled, because the Jews have been gathered again. Yeah. That generation. And until now. Like, it's somewhere from starting in there until now.
Yeah, and both of us tend to think it's more towards the 1967 part.
It really escalated after that. I mean, you could say 1917, the British were in, rule of Jerusalem, and they
it would make them very old right now.
Yeah, well, and they were friendly with the Jews, but they weren't. It really changed in 1967 when they got ownership. That's when it really kicked off. So I'm leaning closer to 1967,
and a very solid chunk of the people that were born pre-1967, not long pre-1967, would definitely still be alive today. Well, so it would make a lot of sense from...
Our dad was born in 55, and he's 66. Yeah. So, I mean, just think about that. Like, sort of smack right in there, and he's only 66. He's got, plenty of time. And so in verse 31, and there shall be men standing in that generation that shall not pass until they shall see an overflowing scourge. For a desolating sickness shall cover the land, or as we would sort of read it, because a desolating sickness shall cover the land. So that generation, again, my dad's generation, our dad's generation, they shall live to see a desolating sickness cover the land.
What? Did you? Have you got the Rona? You caught COVID? COVID.
No comment.
COVID-19.
So just we're going to touch on this desolating sickness now a little bit. Desolating. What does desolating mean? It means devoid of inhabitants, deserted, dilapidated, barren, lifeless, gloomy, empty.
You're painting a picture here.
I am painting a little picture. Isn't that? I mean, does that seem familiar to you? Seems awfully familiar to me.
I haven't lived through anything like that in the past 12 months that I can think of. That I can think about at all.
Yeah, interesting.
It separates people. It makes the streets bare.
Businesses are closed. You can't do anything. You can't buy anything. Weird. I'm just not familiar. I don't know. So now what I will say is Micah from the II LDS Archives actually covers this section of Doctrine Covenants 45 really, really well in his paper and video, Where Are We? And I would recommend people go and read or watch that video. He covers it really well. Goes into other things we're not going to necessarily go into, so I would recommend you go watch that.
Okay, what I find really interesting about that one of those last verses in Doctrine Covenants 45 where it says... There will be men standing in that generation that shall not pass away until they shall see an overflowing scourge or because of a desolating sickness. Now, have there not been millions of so many sicknesses and so many scourges and
bird flu, SARS,
Spanish flu,
Ebola.
I mean, you can keep naming them down the list, but there was clearly something in order to use the Savior to use this as a reference. There's clearly more to this reference than meets the eye. There's more uniqueness with regard to this so that saints can use it and go, oh, we can look to that as a point of reference. If not, then there's no point in noting it there. That's what I think anyway.
It's also interesting how global it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, I've never had Ebola come to Western Australia. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's not, it's not enough of a reference, I think. So to me, one of the major parts about it is that it is so unique, and one of them is that it seems to be that the desolating sickness is what leads to the scourge. And so let's start by talking about what the desolating sickness is, and then we can get into a little bit about what it leads to, being the scourge. So what makes it unique? It is one of the few truly global pandemics. Like you were saying, some of them are so localized. Like, I served my mission in China, Hong Kong, and a few years before I got there, they had the swine flu, bird flu.
Oh, yeah, with the H1N1.
H1N1 bird flu. And when I got there, they had all these, in every apartment, they had lots of water stored, and once a month you'd have to put a drop of bleach in it to keep the water good, and you always had to keep a bunch of food on hand, because when H1N1 happened, all the members of the church and all the missionaries were cooped up in their apartments. They couldn't leave at all. So they had to have enough to get by the week or 2 weeks at least before they could get out again. So, but that was completely localized, but I heard all the stories. It's interesting, we have now one of the only that I know about post 1967, talking about all of those ones that we mentioned that are truly a global pandemic, and not necessarily one of those pandemics that is not it's not a sickness that is extremely destructive.
Like, it's not deadly. It is, but it's not one of the most deadly.
This is not plague proportion deaths. And I don't mean to take away from the fact that it is a horrible thing, and that it is real, and that people die and people get sick. We're not taking away anything from that. We're just saying that it's more unique in that it's much more viral. It's gone absolutely everywhere around the earth. We've all experienced it. And whereas there hasn't really been anything like that post 1967, which is as the times of the Gentiles are coming to a close, and then we move on to the desolating sickness.
It's interesting that verse 31 calls it a desolating sickness and not a deadly sickness. Or
Correct.
It doesn't even specify it to be. And it's desolating. It makes things barren. It makes, and leads to a scourge. Right?
Exactly.
So it's
which better helps
to kill
you.
us all, which it is though. But
so if you can also identify what a scourge is, then that will help you work out whether or not it was preceded by a desolating sickness. Right?
So if we aren't sure if COVID fits this description of a desolating sickness, it may help you to note that President Nelson has referenced the Doctrine Covenants 45 verses 31 to 33 in his footnotes in his talk, What Are We Learning and We'll Never Forget? And that was in the most recent conference in April 2021. So he says this in his talk. Often when the Lord warns us about the perils of the last days, he counsels thus, stand ye in holy places and be not moved. And then he has a number little 2, which is the reference to Doctrine and Covenants section 45, verse 31 to 33. Verse 31 is the desolating sickness verse, and verse 32 and 33 we're going to go into in a minute. But what's interesting to me, or to us, is that he could have just mentioned verses 32 and 33, which literally is verse 32 is talking about standing in holy places, but he included the desolating sickness verse. It's very intentional. And he doesn't make mistakes with his footnotes.
We cannot overemphasize how highly scrutinized the footnotes are for all of these general conference talks. And someone mentioned before, and I don't know if this is a real quote or not because I couldn't find it, but they mentioned that President Nelson was a surgeon in his professional career, and they say that he makes his references the same way that he approaches his work, which was surgical precision in his references. So just know that if we are paying attention to these references that he's making, and he specifically makes sure to include the one about the desolating sickness and the scourge, it has reference to specifically what he's talking about. And he's talking about the time that we're living in right now.
And this is what we're saying, is that scripture is also talking about the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled. So how clear can you really get?
He seems to... So if we aren't 100% sure, or you're not 100% sure whether or not the times of the Gentiles are really coming to a close, it sure does seem like President Nelson is making some kind of a reference to that here.
So super interesting. So verse 32 in Doctrine and Covenants 45, But my disciples shall stand in holy places and shall not be moved. But among the wicked, men shall lift up their voices and curse God and die. Now, we don't think it's necessarily talking about physical death. We're probably thinking it actually talks more about spiritual death. Has COVID caused spiritual death? Yes.
I mean, you will have your own experiences, and we have our own experiences. COVID for us was a catalyst to assist us with the waking up process and turning towards God. Whereas a lot of people, I was talking to a bishop of my last ward, and he was saying COVID has caused people to completely disappear. Some people have sort of woken up and improved, their worship practices, and some people have completely disappeared off the map. Like not even hard to get hold of. Like they've just completely gone.
Yeah.
And COVID has been just a big part of that process. Particularly
in the places like where you're from in Victoria, they've copped it quite bad with COVID. Where we are in Western Australia, we've had it, and we've had no church for a while and stuff like that, but it's been vastly better here.
Yeah.
So some places have had it way worse.
And is it not the easiest possible thing to do, to shake your hand up at the sky and curse God over bad things happening to you?
And I mean, some people are getting it really bad. I think of the small businesses and things like that constantly have to get closed down because one guy's got COVID.
Yeah.
And let's lock the whole place down for however long. And the economy's just suffering. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of reasons to complain.
Yeah.
So it's like understandable to me that this is happening. But so it either woke people up and made them appreciate the gospel and go, I really need to get strong and get good, or it's sent in the other direction.
Correct.
Which we've seen both.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Verse 33, and there shall be earthquakes also in diverse places and many desolations, yet men will harden their hearts against me. Moroni dropping his trumpet, anyone?
He did what?
Apparently he dropped his trumpet.
Moroni dropped a trumpet.
Yeah.
Interesting story.
Interesting.
Where did that happen?
When was that? It was like a couple months ago. I can't remember. Probably should have looked up the exact date.
Well, we all know the story. In Salt Lake City, Moroni on the top of the Salt Lake City temple was holding his trumpet, and there was an earthquake, and he dropped his trumpet.
Yeah.
Subsequent to that process, they've now redoing the whole foundations and footings of the Salt Lake City
It's just
temple.
interesting. It says earthquakes in diverse places and many desolations. It could have said, look, there's going to be earthquakes, massive earthquake or earthquakes everywhere or whatever. But I don't know. It seems awfully pertinent, doesn't it? Awfully spot on.
I think if people look into that, I think they'll find some interesting things.
And then in regards to the many desolations, empty churches, empty streets, churches being denied the ability to worship. You see that in the news all the time.
Seeing people getting thrown into jail for trying to hold their services.
Yeah. And then,
or people conspiring to go outside. There's been groups of people, that wanted to do rallies and protests and things like that, and we're literally seeing authorities turn up to their doors and throw them in jail for conspiring
for freedom.
Freedom to get outside.
Jeez, man.
And look, we're not completely anti-authority, but we are referencing some of the things that this is trying to tell us. This
desolating sickness is causing and leading to.
Exactly.
I saw in the news that, and it's really sad, and this is in Australia, I'm sure it's happening everywhere because the people are sick of it. Small businesses are now protesting the lockdowns because it keeps happening over and over again, and a small business is not going to survive.
What chance do they have?
Yeah, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
So it's sad. So, but depression's on the rise, obesity's on the rise because we're all sitting around lonely, doing nothing and eating food.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah, which I have no problem with, except that it's ruining everyone who doesn't want to have that happen.
You could make it's very interesting. You could make an argument that the side effects of not being able to go outside and do the things you would normally do are far more serious than a health risk than actually getting the thing that we're being protected from. Against our will in most cases. Very interesting times.
Yeah.
I mean, have we ever experienced anything like this? We're young. Have you ever experienced anything like this? I mean, is this not something unique?
Definitely.
Isn't it not something that we can look at for reference? And if you haven't made the reference yet, let's help you a little bit further. The desolating sickness leads to something called a scourge. So in Doctrine Covenants 45, it mentions because of the desolating sickness, then there's going to be the scourge. So let's have a look. What is a scourge? Scourge. Scourge in Old Testament times and in biblical times, it generally relates to a whip. So the noun is a whip, and if you're looking through the topical guide, you can have a look at Scourge, and it gives you lots of different references. For what it really is used in context is oppression of a people or a group of people. So it says, the Lamanites would be a scourge to the Nephites, and this group would be a scourge to that group. And effectively what it's trying to say is that one group is going to oppress the other, from an authoritarian position, is going to be in control of, they're going to be enslaving, they're going to be completely oppressing and putting down another group of people. So it's basically saying that this unique sickness is leading to some kind of authoritarian rule, enslavement, oppression. Interesting reference point, right? Mm-hmm. If you go to Google and you type in scourge, this is what it'll give you. So as a noun, a whip that's used as an instrument, like my vocal cords that don't always work, an instrument of punishment, or a person or thing that causes great trouble or suffering.
Are we seeing great trouble, suffering?
Yeah, we are.
I mean, at least not.
I was going to say, are we?
If at least not vastly, the beginnings of.
I think that's a really good point to make.
Yeah.
And I think it's really good that we have this conversation before it potentially gets a lot greater. We should be sort of looking at this and going, oh, this is unique. This is interesting. What does it lead to? Does it get any better? Have you ever known a government, for example, that's taken control of something and then given it back?
No.
Not without some kind of force. It doesn't generally
Usually
do that.
Doesn't end without there being some kind of a war. Or conflict or some sort.
Kind of an issue. So scourge is a verb. To whip someone is punishment. Interesting. Or also, and this is really interesting straight off Google, we didn't plant this, political methods used to scourge and oppress workers.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Let's have a look over some of the things. Let's use COVID-19 as a potential reference point here. We can't say for sure ourselves, but let's use it as a reference point and see what you think. Since COVID-19 has come along, have we not seen the beginning of some kinds of oppression like we've been talking about? Mask mandates. You don't wear a mask in certain places, like Victoria.
We're lucky enough now not to, but some places are still.
Yep. Yeah. So if you got caught without wearing a mask, I mean, not only could you be fined, but if you had an issue with authority telling you that you had to wear a mask, there were people getting beaten up in the streets and arrested on site.
And just like it's almost creating like this cult-like society where people dobbing on people who aren't wearing masks. Yeah. Get him!
Yeah.
Get him!
Yeah,
it is very interesting.
So you got masks, you got travel restrictions. We can't go outside of the countries. Last year we booked this amazing holiday, and it was going to be super special for our whole family. We booked it, everything was set. We couldn't go on that. Wow, big deal. We don't get to go on our holiday, but nobody's able to leave the countries. So families are split, businesses are
suffering so
really struggling from travel. Then you got things like whole industries in certain places have effectively been open and shut.
Tourism is
toast.
Yeah. Anywhere that relies on
hospitality industry. How many people have gone out there and gone, the government in certain places has said, we're gonna increase you to 15 seated people outside with spacing, this, that, and the other. A lot of these restaurants are trying to work out whether or not they can physically make this happen and make $1. And so they're trying, and the people that they're laying off for work, they're trying to call them back and they're trying to get people to work. But they've gone to try and find other jobs, or they might be getting paid, for example, job seeker payments, job keeper payments, whatever, where they might be getting paid more than to actually come in. And then the restaurant might be going and spending $20,000-$30,000 on stock, and then 2-3 days later, there's too many cases, so the restaurant gets shut down again.
It's debilitating.
These businesses have been working on a knife edge financially, and they're just completely getting liquidated. They're just dropping. Industries are suffering. Hospitality, tourism, entertainment industries, entertainment venues where people can get together. Now, some people that are listening to this, they might not be able to relate as well because they might live in an area where they weren't highly affected.
Texas.
Texas. Florida. Sorry. But we've lived in areas, or I have certainly lived in areas where we're heavily affected, so this is sort of a bugbear for me. COVID passports. Now, we're not necessarily there yet, but I think in some places it's in talks.
Yeah, as in vaccination passports?
Vaccination passports, so restrictions on travel until you've got some kind of proof of certain things, which could lead to, what that could lead to is so scary.
Do you know what, it is scary. And do you know what it makes me think of, or what does this make you think of? Not one person should be lost. Not one death is too many.
Regardless of how it occurs?
Yeah, regardless of what we have to do to make sure that one person isn't lost. One person dying is too many, or one person being lost is too many. Not one soul should be lost. What does that sound like to you?
It sounds like the plan of Lucifer.
It does, doesn't it? So it is scary. It's getting to this point
agency is taken away.
Agency is the whole point of this plan, and this is what we are seeing being taken away. That. And once, what we're saying, these laws and regulations, once they come into effect, and once these things happen, once there's a COVID passport or an immunisation thing, it's all over, honestly, unless you want to play the game, which I know a lot of us don't. And it is scary, and it awfully sounds like Satan's plan from the very beginning, which, let's be honest, he's going to constantly come in and keep trying to get his plan to happen. That's what he wants.
Now, if the majority of people didn't think that these things were for their ultimate benefit, they wouldn't roll over and accept them the way they're accepting them. So the way that this scourge has been brought upon us is not seemingly as though we are enslaved.
Yeah, well, we're happy to be saved.
Yeah, we're putting for the majority of us, we're sort of putting our hands up and saying, we accept this plan.
Do what you got to do, so I don't get the sniffles.
Exactly. which brings me to a scripture I want to share, which is 2 Nephi, chapter 26-22. Now, this authoritarian rule is the authoritarian rule, rule that is often referenced as the secret combinations. Now, I'm not saying the governments that we see in front of us are
necessarily
all involved in, what we would call secret combinations. However, modern day prophets have warned us heavily on the secret combination involvement in our governments and the governments of the earth recently, years ago and more recently. And in the scriptures, there is so much warning about how the secret combinations can affect our lives.
What I find interesting, I was talking about this the other day, about the Book of Mormon. If you could calculate the percentage of how much the Book of Mormon is talking about secret combinations, it's got to be huge.
Yeah.
And Moroni, Moroni, they had this huge amount of plates. They had wagon loads of plates to go through and collate and get all this information. And a massive bulk of what they decided to include was secret combinations, people getting stabbed in the back for gain, money, power, over and over and over again. Why?
When I was young, I'd read them and go, "What is this?
Why is this? Why am I reading 60 chapters of wars?"
I know. There's so much of it.
Why? And that is the question. Why is it there?
Specifically written for our day. Specifically written, as I think it was President Nelson said, it was a survival guide to our day. Specifically for us. Why?
And I think, we all forget that it's literally written for us. The Book of Mormon is a keystone of our religion. It's da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
It's literally written for you to understand that this is happening to you right now.
Correct.
Yeah.
So in 2 Nephi chapter 26, verse 22, it says, "And there are also secret combinations, even as in times of old, according to the combinations of the devil, for he is the founder of all of these things. Yea, the founder of murder and works of darkness, yea, and he leadeth them by the neck with a flaxen cord, until he bindeth them with his strong cords forever. And does he not do that by very, very slowly taking away the freedoms, taking away the rights? Yep. How often do we joke about 14 days to slow down to curve the...
stop the curve. Or
slow the curve.
Whatever it was,
But what would have happened if they said 365 days to stop the curve? People would have been like, nah, forget about it. But that's not the way.
It's turned into that. It's been worse than that.
With flaxen cords, bit at a time, laws and regulations changed, Emergency power is enacted, and with flaxen cords, we're slowly then bound with stronger cords.
Yeah, there's not, like we're saying, they get tighter and tighter. They don't never get loose. They never get loose.
They're not. That's not the plan.
No.
And so I say to people quite often, from what I'm seeing with everything here, my concern isn't for a period of time we struggle a little bit with mandates and things, and then things go back to normal. My real concern is that we struggle with all these things and they morph into something more oppressive.
Yeah.
I hope that's wrong.
Yep.
Let's all hope that that's wrong. But my concern is there.
Mm-hmm.
Because of what we understand about how these secret combinations are in play. And they have goals. They have plans and they have goals, which we'd encourage you to look into. So we want to read a couple of... We're saying how prophets are teaching us about these secret combinations and how they are involved in governments.
Yeah, when we researched this, we were actually quite surprised to see how many of the leaders of the church have talked about these secret combinations.
So if you haven't heard, the prophets and apostles talking about these things, do yourself a quick search, and you'd be shocked.
All of them, like at some stage or another,
they've all said some things.
So we're just going to touch on a couple because we saw them and thought, yeah, let's use those ones. Bruce R. McConkie in 1980. Said this: Gadianton robbers fill the judgment seats in many nations, and evil power seeks to overthrow the freedom of all nations and countries. And that was said in General Conference in 1980.
And Gadianton robbers are specifically the guys that are referenced in the Book of Mormon.
41 years ago, he said that.
Okay. So the power of these Gadianton robbers, this authoritarian, behind-the-scenes secret group, secret society, secret
and they ain't going away. They get worse.
They've been strengthening.
They get more and more strength, more and more until they take over completely. Which, who knows, may have already happened, may happen shortly. I mean, look what we're going through.
Let's see what El Presidente Ezra Taft Benson said on October 2nd, 1988, in General Conference. Secret combinations, lusting for power, gain, and glory are flourishing.
And he would know. He
was the agricultural minister at the time that he was a president of the church. So if anyone knows from a first-hand perspective, and also as a prophecy and revelator,
he was in there, man. Yeah.
He knows. A secret combination that seeks to overthrow the freedoms of all lands, nations, and countries is increasing its evil influence and control over America and the entire world.
So when people have this real distaste for conspiracy theories, probably because you say conspiracy theorist and people think you're bonkers or whatever.
It automatically devalues anything that you say.
And I mean, the CIA came up with the term conspiracy theorist to debunk people who have anything contrary to the narrative that's given by the government or the media. Mm-hmm. When do you follow the prophet of God and what he says about secret combinations? And are you a conspiracy theorist? You know what I mean? Like
Ezra Taft Benson.
If that makes me a conspiracy theorist.
Ezra Taft Benson, when talking about these things, specifically said, "This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a conspiracy fact." So if you can't... So I don't know about all other conspiracy theories, but if we're talking about the pattern that the Book of Mormon is sharing with us about these secret combinations, these Gadianton robbers, these king men, these people that are trying to take over by varying degrees power and authority over the people, and in a lot of cases completely in secret, completely with the people blinded to it. We know that this is not a conspiracy. This is something that's actually happening, and we've been reminded of this by basically every prophet and several apostles all throughout time since the restoration of the gospel. So it's happening.
It's happening.
Can we therefore? Is it a long bow to then connect this scourge with what we're seeing in the nations now? I think it's actually describing what we're talking about here.
So we've gone into a lot of stuff here. We've gone quite deep into the desolating sickness and the scourge, and there's a lot more that we need to cover. So this is going to be at least a 2-part video. What we're trying to get at here is that this is the last days. Hopefully you've followed us along in this journey, and you're coming to that conclusion as well. Yeah. We just want people to understand that it's no more time to be complacent. And that was our problem. We were complacent. We want people to understand there's no more time for that. The scriptures, Jesus himself in Doctrine Covenants 45, and President Nelson himself, hopefully
Connecting the dots.
Hopefully you connect the dots here. The times of the Gentiles is being fulfilled, and a desolating sickness has, covered the land.
It could have been enacted already, and the scourge that then follows that could have been in its infant stages, and hopefully some of the context that we've put together help you connect some of these dots yourself. And so what we're going to be doing is, this is the first part of a several part series. I don't know how long it's going to take.
Well,
us.
I mean, there's so many points. It just, as we studied and started doing this, we sort of started going, wow, there's so much on this one part, this one piece. We had to cover it. So the next video will probably cover a whole bunch of more things.
So as far as being aware that we're in the last days and having some kind of reference points to that, consider this one of our first reference points. We have several to come. We look forward to sharing them with you. And this is from your two favorite two brothers.
So stay tuned for the next part.
Yeah, we're excited for it. We appreciate you. We appreciate the viewers. We appreciate your subscriptions. Hit the notification bell for all future videos. We don't want to get lost in your other subscriptions and your other videos that pop up on your feed. So make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as soon as a new video comes out, you'll be notified of that immediately. And turn your notifications on so you get it while you're at work. Thanks for all you watching out there. We're grateful for you, and we'll see you again on the next part.
We appreciate it.
See ya.